She got in the wrong car. Mafia boss locked the doors and said, "You're not leaving." But the millionaire saved her. Have you ever made a choice in a split second that changed your entire life? One rainy night, one mistake, one door that should never have opened. Meg thought she was getting into her rideshare, but the man behind the wheel wasn't her driver. He was something far more dangerous. And when those locks clicked shut, she realized this wasn't a ride. It was a trap. But in the darkness, someone else was watching. Someone who would risk everything to pull her out of hell. This is a story about wrong choices, dangerous men, and a love that ignites in the most unexpected moment. If you're ready for a story that will keep your heart racing until the very last word, stay with me. And don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Let's begin. The rain came down in sheets, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon. Meg stood beneath the flimsy overhang of a closed cafe, her phone clutched in one hand, her coat pulled tight against the cold. Water dripped from the edge of the awning, splashing onto her shoes, soaking through the canvas. She could feel the dampness creeping up her ankles, could hear the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the skyline. The screen of her phone glowed in the darkness. Your driver is arriving now. Black sedan. She exhaled, her breath misting in the cold air. Finally, the street was nearly empty. The kind of empty that felt wrong, like the city was holding its breath. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting jittery shadows on the wet pavement. A black car slowed at the curb, headlights cutting through the rain like twin blades. Meg didn't think. She just ran. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk, sharp and frantic. She yanked open the back door and slid inside, water dripping from her hair, her breath coming fast and shallow. The warmth of the car wrapped around her like a blanket, and the scent of leather and expensive cologne filled her lungs. She pulled the door shut and let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding through her. God, I thought I was going to drown out there. The words died in her throat. The man in the driver's seat turned slowly, and her entire body went cold. He wasn't her driver. He was younger than she expected. Dark hair slicked back, sharp jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes like polished obsidian that caught the light and reflected nothing back. He wore a tailored black suit, the kind that cost more than her rent, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers, not behind the wheel of a car in the middle of a rainstorm at 2 a.m. But it was his smile that stopped her heart. Slow, deliberate, predatory, like he'd been waiting for her. "Wrong car, sweetheart," he said softly. Meg's hand flew to the door handle. She pulled. Nothing. She pulled again. Harder. Panic rising like bile in her throat, her fingers slipping on the smooth metal. The locks had engaged with a soft mechanical click. "I'd stop doing that if I were you," the man said, his voice calm, almost amused. He shifted in his seat, draping one arm over the steering wheel, watching her with the kind of patience that made her skin crawl. His eyes traveled over her face, slow and assessing, like he was memorizing every detail. "You're not leaving." Her pulse hammered in her ears, so loud she could barely hear the rain. "Let me out." "No, let me out." Her voice cracked, raw with fear. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Just looked at her like she was a puzzle he was already solving, like her fear was something he'd seen 1,000 times before and found mildly entertaining. "You got in my car," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "That makes you my problem now." Meg's breath came in shallow gasps. She pressed herself against the door, the cold glass biting into her shoulder. Her mind raced. Think. Her phone. She still had her phone in her coat pocket. But before she could reach for it, his eyes flicked to her hand. "Don't," he said quietly. She froze. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Outside, the rain pounded against the roof, a relentless rhythm that matched the frantic beat of her heart. "Good girl," he murmured. The way he said it, soft, almost gentle, like he was praising a child, made her stomach twist. This wasn't a random carjacking. This was something else. Something planned. "Who are you?" she whispered. He tilted his head, considering her. A strand of dark hair fell across his forehead. Does it matter? Yes. A pause. Then, that smile again, sharper this time. You can call me Nicholas. The name hit her like a slap. She'd heard it before, whispered in dark corners of the city, in news reports that never named names, in conversations that stopped the moment she walked into a room. Nicholas. The ghost king of the underground. The man who controlled half the city without ever showing his face. The man people spoke about in hushed tones, like saying his name too loud might summon him. And she was sitting in his car. Her throat tightened. Please. I didn't mean to. I know. He turned back to face the windshield, his fingers drumming lightly on the wheel. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. But that doesn't change anything. He started the engine. The low rumble vibrated through the seat, through her bones, settling deep in her chest like a second heartbeat. Where are you taking me? Her voice was barely audible over the rain. Nicholas didn't answer. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding into the empty street like a shadow. Meg's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked out the window, searching desperately for anyone, anything. A pedestrian, another car, a cop. But the city was a blur of rain and darkness, like the world had emptied itself just for this moment. And then she saw it. Another car, sleek, silver, moving fast, too fast for the wet streets. It cut across the intersection ahead, tires screeching as it swerved sideways, blocking their path completely. Nicholas cursed under his breath, low, vicious, and slammed on the brakes. Meg was thrown forward, her seatbelt catching her hard across the chest, stealing the air from her lungs. The silver car sat diagonal across the road, headlights blazing, engine purring. For a moment, nothing moved. Just the rain. Just the two cars facing each other like gunfighters at dawn. Then the silver car's door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered. Rain soaking through his white shirt, plastering the fabric to his chest, outlining every muscle beneath. Dark hair slicked back from his face, water streaming down sharp cheekbones, jaw set in a line that could cut glass. He didn't hurry, didn't run, just walked toward them with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly how dangerous he was. Nicholas's jaw tightened. She saw his hand flex on the steering wheel. You've got to be kidding me. Meg's breath hitched. Who is that? Nicholas didn't answer, but she saw it. The flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear, but something close. Respect. Wariness. The look of a predator recognizing another predator. The man stopped just outside Nicholas's window. Rain poured over him, but he didn't seem to notice. He knocked on the glass. Once, twice. Each knock deliberate, unhurried. Nicholas rolled the window down an inch. Cold air and rain rushed in. Open the door, Nicholas. The stranger's voice was low, quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't need to shout to be heard. The kind that carried weight. This doesn't concern you, Carl, Nicholas said coolly. The girl in your back seat says otherwise. Meg's heart leapt. She leaned forward, her voice breaking. Please, help me. Nicholas's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm. A warning. His thumb pressed against her pulse point, and she knew he could feel how fast her heart was racing. She's fine, Nicholas said, his eyes never leaving the man outside. Drive away, Carl, while you still can. The man, Carl, smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't reassuring. It was the smile of someone who'd seen worse than this and walked away without a scratch. You know I can't do that. And then everything happened at once. Carl moved. Fast. Faster than Meg thought possible. He yanked open the back door. Somehow the locks disengaged with a hiss, like he'd known exactly how to override them. And before Nicholas could react, before he could even turn around, Carl's hand was around Meg's arm, pulling her out into the rain. She stumbled, her legs weak, her heels catching on the wet pavement. But Carl caught her, his arm locked around her waist, strong and steady, holding her upright. Get in my car, he said quietly, his eyes still locked on Nicholas through the open door. Now. Meg didn't need to be told twice. She ran. Her shoes splashed through puddles, rain soaking through her clothes in seconds. Behind her, she heard Nicholas's voice, cold and sharp as a blade. "This isn't over, Carl." "It never is," Carl replied, his voice carrying through the storm. Meg reached the silver car and threw herself into the passenger seat, her hand shaking so hard she could barely pull the seatbelt across her chest. The leather was cold against her soaked clothes, but she didn't care. She was out. She was safe. Carl slid into the driver's seat a second later, calm, composed, like he'd just come back from a meeting instead of confronting a mafia boss in the middle of a rainstorm. Water dripped from his hair, ran down his jaw. He didn't wipe it away. He started the engine. The purr was quieter than Nicholas's car. Controlled. Nicholas's car sat in the middle of the street, headlights glaring like angry eyes. Waiting. Carl put the car in gear and pulled away. Slowly, deliberately, daring Nicholas to follow. He didn't. Meg watched through the rearview mirror as the black sedan sat there, unmoving, until the rain and darkness swallowed it whole. And then she turned to the man beside her. He didn't look at her. His hands were steady on the wheel, his jaw set, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Rain battered the windshield, and the wipers moved in a steady rhythm, sweeping water away in clean arcs. "Who are you?" Meg whispered. He glanced at her, just once, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes, something that made her breath catch. Not pity, not arrogance, something deeper. "Someone who doesn't leave people behind," he said quietly. And for the first time that night, Meg felt like she could breathe. The city blurred past in streaks of light and shadow. Meg couldn't stop shaking. Her hands trembled in her lap, her wet clothes clinging to her skin like ice. She could still feel Nicholas's grip on her wrist, the way his thumb had pressed against her pulse, reading her fear like a book. She wrapped her arms around herself, but it didn't help. The cold had seeped into her bones. Carl drove in silence. His hands never wavered on the wheel, his eyes never left the road. But she felt him watching her in his peripheral vision, assessing, measuring. The car smelled like rain and something else. Sandalwood, maybe. Clean, expensive. Nothing like the suffocating cologne in Nicholas's car. "Where are we going?" Meg's voice came out hoarse, barely audible over the rain. "Somewhere safe," Carl said. "That's not an answer." He glanced at her, and for the first time, she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. "My place. Unless you'd prefer a hospital. I'm not hurt. Not physically." His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made her chest tighten. Understanding. Like he knew exactly what was happening inside her head right now. Meg looked down at her hands. They were still shaking. She clenched them into fists, willing them to stop, but her body wouldn't listen. "I don't even know you." "No," Carl agreed. "You don't. So why should I trust you?" He was quiet for a moment. The wipers swept across the windshield in steady rhythm. Finally, he said, "You shouldn't. But right now, I'm the best option you have." It wasn't comforting, but it was honest. And somehow that meant more than empty reassurances would have. Meg leaned her head against the cold window, watching the city pass. They'd left the downtown core behind. The buildings here were taller, sleeker, the kind of architecture that whispered old money and new power. She recognized the neighborhood. She'd never been able to afford to even walk through it, let alone live here. Carl pulled into an underground parking garage, the silver car descending into darkness before fluorescent lights flickered on overhead. He parked in a private spot, the kind with his name on a metal placard. C. Harrison. Reserved. Harrison. She tucked the name away. He turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. Meg could hear her own breathing. Too fast, too shallow. She forced herself to slow it down. In, out, in, out. "Can you walk?" Carl asked. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He came around to her side, opening the door like she was something fragile. She hated it, hated feeling weak. But when she stood, her legs wobbled, and his hand was there instantly, steadying her. His palm was warm against her elbow, and she realized how cold she was. How cold she'd been since the moment those locks clicked shut in Nicholas's car. They crossed the parking garage to a private elevator. Carl pressed his thumb to a scanner, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The interior was all glass and polished steel, reflecting their images back at them. Meg barely recognized herself. Hair plastered to her face, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, clothes soaked and clinging. She looked like a drowned thing. Carl, on the other hand, looked like he'd just stepped out of a magazine spread. Even soaked, even with water still dripping from his hair, he looked composed, controlled, like chaos couldn't touch him. The elevator climbed. Meg watched the numbers tick upward. 15, 20, 25. It didn't stop until 42, the penthouse. Of course. The doors opened directly into his apartment, and Meg's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the far wall, offering a view of the city that looked like something out of a dream. Rain streaked down the glass, distorting the lights into abstract art. The space was massive. Open concept, all clean lines and minimalist furniture. Dark wood, leather, steel accents. Everything looked expensive and untouched, like a showroom no one actually lived in. Bathrooms through there, Carl said, nodding toward a hallway. There are towels. I'll find you something dry to wear. Meg hesitated. She was dripping water onto his pristine hardwood floors, leaving a trail like evidence of a crime. Go, he said, gentler this time. You're freezing. She was. She couldn't stop shivering. The bathroom was larger than her entire bedroom. White marble, rainfall shower, a tub that could fit 3 people. Meg caught sight of herself in the mirror and flinched. She looked exactly how she felt. Terrified, broken, small. She peeled off her soaked clothes, her fingers numb and clumsy. The fabric clung stubbornly, and by the time she'd wrestled everything off, she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She grabbed one of the towels, thick, soft, probably worth more than her entire wardrobe, and wrapped it around herself. There was a knock on the door. I'm leaving clothes outside, Carl called. She waited until she heard his footsteps retreat, then cracked the door open. A neatly folded stack sat on the floor. Sweatpants, a hoodie, both far too large for her, but clean and dry. She pulled them on, rolling up the sleeves and the pant legs until she could see her hands and feet again. When she emerged, Carl was in the kitchen. He'd changed too. Dry jeans, a black t-shirt that fit him in a way that made her look away quickly. He was making tea, of all things. The kettle hissed softly. Sit, he said, nodding toward the massive leather couch that faced the windows. Meg obeyed, too tired to argue. She sank into the cushions, pulling her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. From here, she could see the entire city spread out below, a glittering maze of light and shadow. Somewhere out there, Nicholas was still driving. Still looking, maybe. The thought made her stomach twist. Carl appeared with 2 mugs. He handed her one. Chamomile, she realized, the scent rising with the steam. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, keeping distance between them, respecting her space. She appreciated that more than he could know. Thank you, Meg said quietly. Carl took a sip of his tea, watching the rain through the windows. Don't thank me yet. What does that mean? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, you got in Nicholas's car. That's not something people just walk away from. Her chest tightened. I didn't know it was his car. Doesn't matter. He won't see it that way. Carl turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not pity. Something harder. You're in his world now, whether you wanted to be or not. I don't want to be in anyone's world, Meg said, her voice sharper than she intended. I just want to go home. Where's home? She gave him the address before she could think better of it. A small apartment in a neighborhood that definitely didn't have private elevators or marble bathrooms. Carl shook his head. You can't go back there. Not tonight. Why not? Because Nicholas knows what you look like now. He'll find you, and when he does... Carl stopped, his jaw tightening. When he does what? Meg pressed. Carl set his mug down on the glass coffee table. Nicholas doesn't like loose ends. You're a witness to something you shouldn't have seen. Getting into his car, seeing his face, hearing his name. That's more information than most people who cross him ever get. And they don't usually live long enough to tell anyone about it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Meg's hands tightened around her mug. So what am I supposed to do? Just hide? Forever? No. But you need to be smart. Stay somewhere he can't find you. At least until I figure out what his next move is. And how would you know what his next move is? Carl smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because I know how he thinks. You said his name like you know him. Back there, in the rain. He called you Carl. You called him Nicholas. You know each other. We have history, Carl admitted. What kind of history? He looked at her for a long moment, like he was deciding how much to tell her. Finally, he said, the kind where we've been on opposite sides of things for a very long time. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight. His voice was firm, but not unkind. Meg wanted to push, wanted to demand the truth, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves. The adrenaline that had kept her upright was draining away, leaving her hollow and heavy. You can stay here, Carl said. Guest room's down the hall. Door locks from the inside. You'll be safe. Why are you helping me? The question came out smaller than she intended. Carl stood, picking up his mug. He looked down at her, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Something that looked almost like regret. Because someone should have helped me once, he said quietly, and no one did. Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving her alone with her tea and the rain and the endless glittering city below. Meg sat there for a long time, watching the storm, wondering what kind of man saved strangers in the middle of the night, wondering what kind of history connected him to someone like Nicholas, wondering if she'd just traded one danger for another. But when she finally stood and made her way to the guest room, when she locked the door and climbed into the massive bed with sheets that smelled like lavender and safety, she realized something. For the first time since those locks clicked shut, she wasn't afraid, and that scared her more than anything else. Meg woke to sunlight. It poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the guest room, warm and golden, nothing like the cold rain of last night. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was too soft, the sheets too expensive, the silence too complete. Then memory crashed back. Nicholas's smile, the locked doors, Carl's hand pulling her into the rain. She sat up, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't name. The guest room was beautiful in the daylight. Minimalist like the rest of the apartment, but warmer somehow. Cream walls, a single piece of abstract art, a chair by the window that looked like it had never been sat in. Everything perfect. Everything untouched. She could smell coffee. Meg climbed out of bed, still wearing Carl's oversized hoodie and sweatpants. Her clothes from last night were gone. She'd left them in a wet heap in the bathroom. Either Carl had taken them, or he had someone who did that sort of thing. She wasn't sure which possibility made her more uncomfortable. She found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a mug in one hand and his phone in the other. He was dressed for business. Charcoal suit, white shirt, no tie yet. His hair was still damp from a shower, and in the morning light she could see details she'd missed last night. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his shoulders filled out the suit jacket, the small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible. He looked up when she entered, and something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, exactly, but a softening. Coffee? He offered. Please. He poured her a cup without asking how she took it, then slid the sugar and cream across the counter. She added both, more than she probably should have, and took a sip. It was perfect. Rich and smooth, the kind of coffee that cost more per pound than she made in a day. How'd you sleep? Carl asked. Better than I expected. It was true. She'd thought she'd lie awake all night, replaying everything, but exhaustion had pulled her under the moment her head hit the pillow. Good. He set his phone down, giving her his full attention. We need to talk. Those 4 words made her stomach drop. About what? About what happens next. Meg wrapped both hands around her mug, letting the warmth ground her. You said I couldn't go home. You can't. Not yet. So what am I supposed to do? Stay here forever? No. But you need to stay somewhere. Nicholas can't find you until I can neutralize the situation. Neutralize. She repeated the word slowly. You make it sound like a business transaction. In a way, it is. Carl leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. Nicholas runs his operation like a corporation. Everything's calculated. Risk versus reward. He took you because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, but keeping you, that's a different calculation entirely. What does that mean? It means he's weighing his options. You're a liability. You saw his face, heard his name, but you're also a nobody, no offense, which means coming after you openly would draw attention he doesn't want. So right now he's trying to decide if you're worth the trouble. The casual way he said it, you're a nobody, should have stung. But he was right. She was nobody. A waitress with student debt and a studio apartment she could barely afford. Nicholas operated in a world so far removed from hers they might as well have been on different planets. And what about you? Meg asked quietly. Why does he hate you? Carl's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I took something from him once. Something he valued. What? Territory, power, pride. He shrugged, like those things were interchangeable. Take your pick. You're not going to tell me, are you? Not today. He checked his watch. Expensive, understated, probably worth more than her car. I have meetings. You'll stay here. It wasn't a question. What if I want to leave? Meg challenged. Carl looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something hard beneath the polished surface. Then you're free to go. I'm not going to lock you in. But if you walk out that door, you're on your own. And I can't guarantee Nicholas won't be waiting. The words settled over her like a weight. He was right, and they both knew it. She had nowhere else to go. No one else who could help her. Fine, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. I'll stay. Carl's expression softened. There's food in the fridge, Netflix on the TV, books in the study if you're into that. Anything you need, just... He hesitated, then pulled out his wallet and extracted a sleek black credit card. He slid it across the counter toward her. Meg stared at it. I can't take that. You need clothes. Toiletries. Whatever. Consider it a loan. I don't even know you. I know. He picked up his phone and his keys, preparing to leave. But right now, I'm all you've got. The truth of it sat between them, undeniable. Carl headed toward the elevator, then paused. He turned back, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter. Lock the door behind me. Don't answer it for anyone. Don't leave. And Meg? She looked up. Don't trust anyone who says they're here to help you. Not even if they mention my name. And then he was gone, the elevator doors sliding shut, leaving her alone in the massive apartment with nothing but sunlight and silence, and questions that multiplied with every passing second. Meg spent the morning exploring. The apartment was huge. 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a study lined with books that actually looked read, a gym that put her building's entire amenities floor to shame. Everything was beautiful and impersonal, like a high-end hotel room. There were no photographs. No personal touches. Nothing that told her who Carl Harrison actually was. She found his study and stood in the doorway, feeling like she was trespassing. The desk was clean, organized, a laptop closed in the center. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, business books mostly, but also philosophy, history, a few novels that surprised her. The Count of Monte Cristo, The Great Gatsby, stories about men and revenge and reinvention. She was about to leave when she noticed the frame on the shelf behind the desk. The only personal item in the entire room. A photograph. Meg stepped closer. It was old, the colors slightly faded. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9, standing next to a woman. The woman had dark hair and a soft smile, her hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy looked serious even then. Dark eyes that seemed too old for his face. Carl. She wondered who the woman was. Mother? Sister? and why this was the only photograph in the entire apartment. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her real phone. The one she'd somehow managed to hold on to through everything. She pulled it out, expecting messages from worried friends, maybe her roommate asking where she was. Instead, there was a single text from an unknown number. "You can't hide in his tower forever, Meg." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, her hands starting to shake. How did he have her number? How did he know where she was? Another text came through. "Carl can't protect you. Not from me. Not from what's coming." The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. She backed away from it like it was a snake, her heart hammering against her ribs. Nicholas. It had to be Nicholas. But how? The elevator dinged. Meg's head snapped toward the sound. Carl had said he'd be gone for hours. He'd said not to open the door for anyone. The door slid open. But it wasn't a stranger. It was Carl. He stepped out of the elevator, took one look at her face, and his entire demeanor shifted. In 2 strides he was across the room, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers. What happened? His voice was sharp, urgent. Meg couldn't speak. She just pointed at her phone on the floor. Carl released her and picked it up, his jaw tightening as he read the messages. Something dark crossed his face. Anger, yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like fear. "He texted you," Carl said flatly. "How does he know I'm here? How does he have my number?" Carl's hand tightened around her phone. "Because Nicholas has resources I can't match. Eyes everywhere. People in places you wouldn't expect. Then I'm not safe here." Panic rose in her chest, sharp and choking. "He knows where I am. He's bluffing." Carl cut her off. His voice was calm, controlled, but his eyes were steel. "If he knew exactly where you were, he wouldn't text. He'd act. This is a psychological game. He wants you scared. He wants you to run." "Well, it's working," Meg whispered. Carl set the phone down and turned to face her fully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, steady, solid, real. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "Nicholas is powerful. He's dangerous. But he's not invincible. And I won't let him touch you." "Why?" The question burst out of her. "Why do you care? You don't know me. I'm nobody. You said so yourself." Something flickered across Carl's face. "I said you were nobody to Nicholas. I never said you were nobody to me." The words hung in the air between them, charged with something Meg couldn't name. She looked down at their joined hands. His fingers had curled around hers at some point, protective, grounding. She should pull away. She should put distance between them. But she didn't want to. "I came back because I had a feeling," Carl said. "Call it instinct. I've learned to trust it when it comes to Nicholas." He released her hand slowly, like he was reluctant to break the contact. "We need to move you. Somewhere he can't trace. Somewhere off the grid." "Where?" "I have a place. Outside the city. Safe house. No one knows about it except me." "When?" "Tonight." He checked his watch again. "I need a few hours to make arrangements. Can you be ready by 6? Meg nodded, not trusting her voice. Carl started toward the elevator, then stopped. He turned back one more time, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "You're not alone in this, Meg. I need you to know that." And then he was gone again. Meg stood in the middle of his expensive apartment, surrounded by sunlight and silence, holding her phone with its threatening messages, and realized with startling clarity that somewhere in the last 12 hours, her life had become something she no longer recognized. But for the first time since those locks clicked shut in Nicholas's car, she wasn't sure if that was entirely a bad thing. By 6 o'clock, the sun was setting, painting the city in shades of amber and crimson. Meg stood by the window, watching the light fade, a duffel bag at her feet. Carl had sent someone, a quiet woman who'd appeared at noon with bags from expensive stores, clothes in Meg's exact size, toiletries, everything she might need. The woman hadn't spoken beyond a polite greeting, hadn't asked questions, and had disappeared as quickly as she'd come. Meg had spent the afternoon trying not to think about the texts, trying not to jump every time her phone buzzed. But Nicholas's words kept echoing in her head. You can't hide in his tower forever. He was right. The elevator dinged, and Carl stepped out. He'd changed. Dark jeans, black jacket, looking less like a businessman and more like someone ready for trouble. His eyes found hers immediately. Ready? He asked. Meg picked up the duffel bag. As I'll ever be. They descended to the parking garage in silence, but this time Carl didn't go to the silver sedan. Instead, he led her to a different vehicle. A black SUV with tinted windows, anonymous and unremarkable. Different car? Meg asked. Nicholas knows the sedan. This one's clean, untraceable. Carl opened the passenger door for her, and she climbed in. The interior smelled like new leather. Carl slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, but he didn't pull out immediately. Instead, he turned to her. It's about an hour's drive, he said. Once we're there, you'll be safe. I promise. Meg wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Carl must have seen the doubt in her eyes, because his expression softened. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I've never broken a promise, Meg, and I'm not about to start now. He pulled out of the garage, and the city swallowed them whole. They drove north, leaving the glittering skyline behind. The buildings grew shorter, the streets wider, the lights fewer. Soon they were on a highway cutting through darkness, the only illumination coming from their headlights and the occasional passing car. Meg watched the landscape blur past, her reflection ghostly in the window. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question, Carl said, his eyes on the road. How do you know Nicholas? Carl was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, we grew up in the same neighborhood. A long time ago. That surprised her. She'd assumed they were enemies from different worlds, not two people with shared history. You were friends? Something like that. His jaw tightened. Before we were enemies. What happened? Carl's hands flexed on the steering wheel. We wanted different things. He wanted power at any cost. I wanted out. When I left, I took something with me. Something he's never forgiven me for. What? His trust. Carl glanced at her, and there was something raw in his eyes. Nicholas doesn't forgive betrayal, even when it's necessary, even when staying would have destroyed me. Meg absorbed this. So you were like him once, in that world? I was worse, Carl said quietly. I did things I'm not proud of, things I can't take back. When I finally got out, I swore I'd never go back. And then you got in his car. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. I'm sorry, Meg whispered. Don't be. I made my choice the moment I pulled you out. He turned off the highway onto a smaller road, trees pressing in on either side. Nicholas and I have been circling each other for years. This was always going to come to a head eventually. You're just the catalyst. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's the truth. The road narrowed further, becoming little more than a dirt path through the woods. Branches scraped against the windows, and Meg's heart rate picked up. Where was he taking her? Then, through the trees, she saw it. A house. Small, wooden, lights glowing warm in the windows. It looked like something out of a storybook, hidden away from the world, surrounded by forest and silence. Carl parked in front and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet was absolute. This is it, he said. No one knows about this place. I bought it under a shell company, paid in cash. There's no paper trail. Nicholas won't find you here. Meg stared at the house. You said safe house. I thought you meant something temporary. This is temporary, until I can figure out a permanent solution. And what's that? Carl looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I'm still working on that part. They got out of the SUV. The air was cold and clean, smelling of pine and earth. Meg could hear the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a night bird. No traffic, no sirens, no city sounds at all. Carl grabbed her duffel bag and led her to the front door. He unlocked it with a physical key. No smart locks, no technology, and gestured for her to enter first. The interior was warm and lived in a way his penthouse wasn't. Exposed beams, a stone fireplace, furniture that looked comfortable rather than expensive, a kitchen with copper pots hanging from hooks, bookshelves filled with worn paperbacks. You actually live here sometimes, Meg realized. When I need to think. When the city gets too loud. Carl set her bag down. There are 2 bedrooms upstairs. Take whichever you want. There's food in the pantry, firewood out back, everything you need. You're leaving? Panic spiked through her. I have to go back to the city, handle some things. But I'll be back tomorrow. Carl. He turned to face her, and suddenly he was close. Closer than he'd been before. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the night air. You're safe here, he said softly. I swear it. How can you be sure? Because this is the one place in the world that's mine. The one place he can't touch. His hand came up, hesitating for a moment before his fingers brushed a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was gentle, careful, like she was something fragile. I won't let him hurt you, Meg. She should step back, should put distance between them. But she couldn't move, couldn't look away. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Carl's thumb traced her cheekbone, so light she almost didn't feel it. Because when I look at you, I see someone who doesn't belong in this world. Someone who deserves better than to be collateral damage in a war she didn't choose. And when I look at you, I see someone who's trying to convince himself he's not still part of that world. Something flashed in his eyes. Pain, maybe. Recognition. You might be right. They stood there, barely breathing. The space between them charged with something neither of them could name. Meg's heart hammered against her ribs. His hand was still on her face, warm and steady, and she found herself leaning into it without meaning to. Carl's gaze dropped to her lips. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to notice. Then he stepped back, his hand falling away, leaving cold air in its wake. Lock the doors after I leave, he said, his voice rougher than before. Don't answer for anyone but me. I'll call before I come back. He turned and headed for the door, and Meg felt something twist in her chest. Fear? Disappointment? She couldn't tell anymore. Carl, she called out. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. His shoulders tensed. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him, the sound of the SUV's engine fading into the distance. Meg stood in the middle of the cabin, surrounded by warmth and safety, and a silence that felt almost sacred. She touched her cheek where his fingers had been, and realized with startling clarity that she was in more danger than Nicholas could ever pose. Because somewhere in the last 24 hours, she'd started to trust Carl Harrison, and that terrified her more than anything else. The night deepened. Meg explored the cabin, learning its corners and creaks. She found a bedroom upstairs with a window overlooking the forest, made up the bed with sheets she found in a closet. Everything was clean, ready, like Carl had prepared this place knowing someday he might need it. She was exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. Nicholas's texts, Carl's touch, the way he'd looked at her like she was something worth protecting. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. She grabbed it, her heart in her throat. But it wasn't Nicholas this time. You okay? Carl relief flooded through her. Yes, house is perfect. Good. Get some sleep. I'll call in the morning. She stared at the screen, her thumbs hovering. Then, before she could overthink it, she typed, Carl? Yeah? What happens if Nicholas finds me? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, he won't. But if he does, this time the response was immediate. Then he goes through me first. Meg's chest tightened. She set the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the dark forest. Somewhere in the city, Carl was driving back to his penthouse. Somewhere else, Nicholas was planning his next move. And here she was, caught between 2 dangerous men. One who wanted to use her, and one who wanted to save her. She wondered which one scared her more. Outside, an owl called. The trees whispered secrets. And Meg stood at the window, watching shadows dance in the moonlight, wondering when her life had turned into something out of a dream, or a nightmare, and if she'd ever find her way back to normal. Deep down, she suspected the answer was no. Normal was gone. The moment those locks clicked shut, the moment Carl pulled her into the rain, normal had died. Now there was only survival. And maybe, just maybe, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Morning came softly to the forest. Meg woke to birdsong and pale sunlight filtering through the curtains, so different from the harsh city mornings she was used to. For a moment, she let herself pretend this was a vacation, that she'd chosen to be here, that the world outside these walls wasn't hunting her. Then her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and reality crashed back. On my way. Should be there by noon. Carl. She exhaled slowly, relief and something else flooding through her. Something she didn't want to examine too closely. Meg spent the morning making coffee in Carl's kitchen, exploring the books on his shelves. She found a worn copy of Jane Eyre and curled up in the armchair by the window, trying to lose herself in someone else's story. But every few pages, her mind would drift. To Nicholas's cold smile, to Carl's hand on her face, to the impossible situation she'd stumbled into. At 11:30, she heard the sound of tires on gravel. Her heart jumped. She stood, the book falling from her lap, and moved to the window. The black SUV rolled to a stop, and Carl emerged, carrying paper bags from what looked like a deli. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, his usual composure slightly frayed around the edges. Meg met him at the door. "You look exhausted," she said by way of greeting. Carl's mouth quirked. "Good morning to you too." He held up the bags. "I brought lunch. Hope you like sandwiches." They ate at the small kitchen table, and for a while it felt almost normal. Carl told her about the city, carefully editing out anything related to Nicholas. Meg talked about her life before. Her job, her roommate, the classes she'd been taking at night trying to finish her degree. "What were you studying?" Carl asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Literature. I know, impractical. Everyone told me to do something useful, but..." She shrugged. "Stories matter. They're how we make sense of chaos." Carl studied her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "You're right. They do. What about you? How does someone go from..." She gestured vaguely, not wanting to say the underworld out loud. "To legitimate business? Carefully, painfully, one decision at a time." He set his sandwich down. "I spent years building something clean, something I could be proud of. But the past doesn't let go easily. It follows you, waits for moments like this." "You mean me?" "I mean Nicholas using you to get to me." Carl's jaw tightened. "This was never about you, Meg. It's about him and me. An old debt he thinks I owe." "What debt?" Carl was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I left his organization, took information with me, used it to destroy parts of his operation before I disappeared. In his world, that's unforgivable. So he's been waiting for a chance at revenge. For 12 years. Carl's eyes met hers. "And you walked right into the middle of it." The weight of it pressed down on Meg's chest. "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing. You didn't do anything wrong." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You got unlucky. That's all." His palm was warm, solid. Meg stared at their joined hands, feeling that dangerous pull again. The one that said trust him, believe him, let him protect you. "What's the plan?" she asked quietly. "I can't hide forever." "No, but I'm working on something. A way to end this that doesn't..." He stopped, his hand tightening on hers. "Doesn't what?" "Doesn't get you killed." The bluntness of it stole her breath. Carl pulled his hand back, running it through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Nicholas is smart, patient. He knows I'll protect you, so he'll wait. He'll watch. And the moment he sees an opening, he'll take it." Carl stood, pacing to the window. "I need to give him something else to focus on. Something bigger than you." Like what? Like me. Carl turned back to face her, and there was something dark in his expression. Something that reminded her he'd once lived in the same world as Nicholas. I'm going to draw him out. Make him come for me instead of you. That's insane. It's the only way. Carl, I'm not asking for permission, Meg. His voice was firm, but not unkind. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You stay here, safe, and I go back to the city and end this. Fear spiked through her. What if he kills you? He won't. How can you be sure? Because I know him. I know how he thinks, how he moves, and I know exactly what bait will bring him out of hiding. Carl crossed back to her, kneeling so they were eye level. Trust me, please. Meg wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was suicide. But looking into his eyes, seeing the determination there, she realized something. This wasn't just about protecting her. This was about Carl finally facing the ghost that had been chasing him for 12 years. When? She whispered. Tomorrow night. There's a gala, charity event. Nicholas will be there. He always attends, keeps up appearances. I'll make contact. Set up a meeting. Neutral ground. And then what? And then we negotiate. Carl's hand came up, cupping her cheek. The gesture was becoming familiar, and that terrified her. I give him what he wants, and he leaves you alone. What does he want? Carl's thumb brushed her cheekbone, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret. Me. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. No, Meg said, her hand coming up to grip his wrist. No, you can't just... Carl, he'll kill you. Maybe. But at least you'll be safe. I don't want to be safe if it means you're dead. The words burst out before she could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. Carl went very still, his eyes searching hers. Meg, he said softly. I mean it. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. We'll find another way. There is no other way. Then we keep running. Both of us. We disappear. Change our names. Start over somewhere he'll never find us. Carl smiled, but it was sad. You'd do that? Give up your entire life? Your friends, your family, your future? I don't have much of a life to give up. And my family. She swallowed hard. I lost my parents 5 years ago. Car accident. I have a few friends, but no one who'd be devastated if I disappeared. So, yes, I'd do that. Something shifted in Carl's expression. The carefully controlled mask he always wore cracked, just a little, and she saw the man underneath. Vulnerable. Alone. Just like her. You barely know me, he said, his voice rough. I know enough. Her hand tightened on his wrist. I know you pulled me out of that car when you could have driven away. I know you've kept me safe when you didn't have to. I know you're willing to die for a stranger. That's enough. Carl's forehead dropped to rest against hers, and they stayed like that, breathing the same air, the world narrowing to just this moment. You're making this very difficult, he whispered. Good. His laugh was quiet, almost broken. I can't drag you into this life, Meg. I spent 12 years getting out. I won't pull you in. Too late. I'm already in. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. So stop trying to be noble and let me help. Help how? Meg didn't have an answer. But sitting there, Carl's hand still on her face, his eyes dark and intense, and full of something she didn't dare name, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't letting him face Nicholas alone. They spent the afternoon planning. Carl was reluctant, but Meg wore him down with logic and stubbornness. If Nicholas wanted leverage, he'd use her whether she was hidden or not. Better to be part of the solution than a pawn waiting to be played. You're not going to the gala, Carl said firmly. I never said I would. But I'm not staying locked in this cabin while you walk into a trap. It's not a trap if I see it coming. It's still a trap. Carl sighed, rubbing his temples. You're infuriating. I've been told that before. Meg poured them both coffee, her third cup of the day. What if we turn it around? What if instead of you offering yourself, you offer him information? Something he wants more than revenge. Like what? You said you took information when you left. Do you still have it? Carl's eyes sharpened. Some of it. But it's 12 years old. Worthless now. Is it, though? You know how his organization works. You know his vulnerabilities. That's not worthless. That's leverage. Carl was quiet, thinking. You're suggesting I threaten to expose him if he doesn't back off. Mutually assured destruction. You have dirt on him. He backs off, or it all goes public. That would make me a target for every criminal organization in the city. You already are a target, Meg pointed out. At least this way, you're the one holding the gun. Carl stared at her, and slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not the polite business smile she'd seen before. A real one. It transformed him, made him look younger, less haunted. You're brilliant, he said. Heat crept up Meg's neck. I read a lot of thrillers. No, you're strategic. You see angles I miss. He stood, energy returning to his movements. This could work. If I can convince him I have enough to bury him, he'll negotiate. He's ruthless, but he's not stupid. So, we have a plan. We have the beginning of one. Carl checked his watch. I need to make some calls. Reach out to old contacts. See what I can pull together. He disappeared into the other room, and Meg heard his voice, low and urgent, speaking in tones she couldn't make out. She cleaned up from lunch, her mind racing. For the first time since this nightmare started, she felt like maybe, they had a chance. When Carl returned an hour later, his expression was grim. What's wrong? Meg asked. Nicholas moved faster than I expected. He's already making noise, asking questions about you. About where I might hide someone. Meg's stomach dropped. Does he know about this place? No, but he's getting close. We might have less time than I thought. How much time? Carl met her eyes. Maybe 48 hours. Maybe less. The walls suddenly felt closer. The forest less like protection and more like a cage. Then we move fast, Meg said, forcing steel into her voice. We contact him first. Set the meeting on our terms. Carl nodded slowly. Tomorrow. I'll send word through back channels. Neutral location. Public enough to be safe. Private enough to talk. And me? You stay here. Non-negotiable. Meg wanted to fight him on it, but she saw the fear beneath his determination. He was terrified. Not for himself, but for her. And that realization settled something in her chest. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. But Carl? Yeah? Come back to me. The words hung in the air, more intimate than she'd intended. Carl crossed the room in 3 strides, and before she could process what was happening, his hands were framing her face, and his lips were on hers. The kiss was soft, gentle, nothing like the violence and chaos that had thrown them together. It tasted like coffee and desperation, and promises neither of them could keep. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his breath warm on her skin. I will, he whispered. I swear. And Meg closed her eyes, letting herself believe him, even though she knew better than to trust promises in a world this dark. Carl left before dawn. Meg woke to the sound of the SUV's engine fading into the distance, and she knew without checking that he was gone. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter, his handwriting sharp and precise. Stay inside. Don't answer the door. I'll call when it's done. See. She crumpled the note in her fist, frustration and fear warring in her chest. He'd kissed her last night, promised to come back, and then left before she could argue. Before she could tell him this was a mistake. Before she could admit that somewhere between the rain and the cabin and his hand on her face, she'd started to care about him in ways that terrified her. The day crawled by. Meg tried to read, tried to sleep, tried to do anything but watch the clock and imagine all the ways this could go wrong. Carl had promised to call, but her phone stayed silent. Each hour that passed felt like a small death. By 4 p.m, she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her phone and called him. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Carl, it's me. I know you said not to worry, but just call me back, please. Let me know you're okay. She hung up and immediately regretted it. What if Nicholas had people monitoring calls? What if she'd just put Carl in more danger? But before she could spiral further, Her phone buzzed. Can't talk. Meeting in 2 hours. We'll call after. Carl relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fresh anxiety. 2 hours. In 2 hours, Carl would be face to face with Nicholas, trying to negotiate his way out of a war that had been brewing for over a decade. And she was stuck here, helpless. Meg paced the cabin, her mind refusing to settle. She kept replaying Carl's words. Neutral location. Public enough to be safe. But what did safe mean when dealing with someone like Nicholas? What did neutral mean in a world where power was the only currency that mattered? At 5:30, her phone rang. Unknown number. Her heart stopped. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the answer button. It could be Carl, calling from a different phone. Or it could be... She answered. Hello? Meg. Nicholas's voice was smooth, almost pleasant. I hope I'm not interrupting. Every muscle in her body tensed. How did you get this number? Please. I've had your number since the moment you stepped into my car. She could hear the smile in his voice. I've just been waiting for the right time to use it. What do you want? To talk. Just talk. You and I got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like to remedy that. I don't have anything to say to you. No? Not even about Carl? Nicholas's tone sharpened, just slightly. He's meeting me tonight. Did he tell you that? Meg's throat tightened. Yes. And did he tell you what he's planning to offer me? She said nothing. Nicholas laughed low and dark. Of course he didn't. Carl always was too noble for his own good. Let me guess. He told you he'd handle it. Told you to stay hidden while he played hero. He's trying to protect me. From me? How sweet. The mockery in his voice made her hands shake. But here's what Carl didn't tell you, Meg. He doesn't have anything I want. The information he thinks he has? Outdated. Useless. I rebuilt my operation years ago specifically to protect against whatever leverage he thought he had. You're lying. Am I? Then why hasn't he called you in the last hour? Why hasn't he checked in? Meg's stomach dropped. Because Nicholas was right. Carl should have called by now. Should have sent another text. Something. What did you do? She whispered. Nothing. Yet. But the night is young, and Carl is walking into a situation he doesn't fully understand. Nicholas paused, letting the words sink in. You want to save him? Come to the meeting. The Grand Hotel, rooftop garden, 6:30. Come alone, and I'll let him walk away. I don't believe you. You don't have to believe me. But you do have to ask yourself, can you live with doing nothing while Carl throws his life away for yours? The line went dead. Meg stood frozen, the phone pressed to her ear, Nicholas's words echoing in her mind. It was a trap. It had to be a trap. Carl had told her to stay here, to trust him, to let him handle it. But what if Nicholas was telling the truth? What if Carl was walking into a meeting with no leverage, no backup, nothing but his own stubborn determination to save her? She looked at the clock. 6 o'clock, 30 minutes. The Grand Hotel was 45 minutes away. Meg grabbed her coat. She drove Carl's SUV like a woman possessed, pushing the speed limit, her heart hammering the entire way. She knew this was stupid. Knew Carl would be furious. But the alternative, sitting in that cabin while he walked into an ambush, was impossible. Nicholas wanted her? Fine. She'd give him exactly what he wanted. The Grand Hotel rose against the darkening sky, all glass and steel and old money. Meg parked in the garage and took the elevator to the top floor, her hands shaking so badly she could barely press the button. The rooftop garden was beautiful. String lights hung between trellises, casting everything in a soft golden glow. Plants and flowers created natural walls, intimate spaces within the larger area. And at the far end, near the edge overlooking the city, she saw them. Carl and Nicholas. They stood 10 feet apart, two predators circling, tension crackling in the air between them. Carl's back was to her, but she could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the controlled fury in every line of his body. Nicholas faced her direction, and when he saw her emerge from the elevator, his smile was triumphant. Right on time, Nicholas said. Carl spun around, and the look on his face, shock, anger, fear, made Meg's chest tighten. "Meg, what the hell are you doing here?" His voice was low, dangerous. "He called me, said you were in trouble. And you believed him?" Carl closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "I told you to stay at the cabin. I told you. I knew what you told me, but I couldn't just sit there while—" She broke off, her eyes finding Nicholas over Carl's shoulder. "While you walked into this alone." Nicholas slow-clapped, the sound mocking. "How touching. Young love conquers all." "Shut up," Carl snarled, not taking his eyes off Meg. "You need to leave, right now." "I'm afraid she can't do that." Nicholas's voice carried across the rooftop, casual and cold. "See, I invited her here for a reason. This negotiation? It's not about information, Carl. It's not about the past. It's about evening the scales." Carl turned slowly, positioning himself between Meg and Nicholas. "What are you talking about? You took something from me 12 years ago. Not just information. You took my reputation. My credibility. You made me look weak." Nicholas took a step closer, hands in his pockets, relaxed and confident. "So now I take something from you. Something you care about. Fair trade." Understanding dawned on Carl's face. This was never about letting me negotiate. No. This was about making you watch while I take her. While I show you that leaving my organization didn't make you safe. Didn't make the people you care about safe. Nicholas smiled. "You want it out of my world? Fine. But you don't get to have happiness too. That's the price." Meg's blood ran cold. Carl's hand found hers, gripping tight. "Over my dead body," Carl said quietly. "That can be arranged." And then everything happened at once. Men appeared from the shadows, 4 of them, moving fast. Nicholas must have had them waiting. Carl shoved Meg behind him, his body a shield, but there were too many. Hands grabbed her arms, yanking her backward. She screamed, fought, but they were too strong. "Let her go." Carl's voice was raw, desperate. He lunged, but one of Nicholas's men hit him, hard, across the face. Carl stumbled, and Meg's heart shattered at the sight of blood on his lip. "Stop!" She twisted in the grip of her captor. "Stop, please!" Nicholas walked forward slowly, surveying the scene like a director admiring his work. "This is how it ends, Carl. You watch her disappear. You live with that, and you remember. This is what happens when you betray me." Carl's eyes met Meg's, and she saw everything in them. Rage, desperation, love. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't." Tears streamed down her face. "Don't apologize, just—" But she never finished the sentence. Because Carl moved. Faster than she'd ever seen anyone move. He grabbed the man holding him, used his momentum to throw him into another. Then he was spinning, his fist connecting with a 3rd man's jaw. The sound of bone on bone sickeningly loud. It was brutal, efficient, the kind of fighting that came from years of survival. Nicholas's smile finally faltered. The man holding Meg loosened his grip just enough. She drove her elbow back into his ribs, heard him grunt, and tore free. Carl was there instantly, his arm around her waist, pulling her toward the elevator. "Run!" he commanded. They ran. Behind them, Nicholas shouted orders. Footsteps pounded. But Carl was faster, his hand locked around hers, pulling her forward. They hit the elevator, and Carl slammed his palm against the button. The doors started to close. A hand caught them. One of Nicholas's men. Meg screamed as he forced the doors open, lunging inside. Carl met him head-on, and the 2 men collided in a tangle of fists and fury. Meg pressed herself against the elevator wall, watching in horror as they fought in the confined space. Carl was winning. Had to be winning. But then the man pulled something from his jacket. A knife. "Carl." Meg's warning came too late. The blade flashed. Carl twisted, but not fast enough. It caught him across the ribs, and blood bloomed dark against his white shirt. Meg didn't think. She grabbed the man's arm, yanking with all her strength, throwing him off balance. Carl used the opening, driving his fist into the man's temple. The man crumpled. The elevator doors closed. They descended in ringing silence. Carl pressed his hand to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. His face was pale, jaw clenched against pain. "How bad?" Meg whispered. "I'll live." But he swayed slightly, and she caught him, her arms around his waist, holding him up. "We need a hospital." "No. Safe house first. Clean it up there." "Carl, no hospitals, Meg. They'll find us." His eyes met hers, fierce despite the pain. "Trust me." The elevator reached the garage. Meg half carried Carl to the SUV, her hands shaking as she helped him into the passenger seat. Blood soaked through his shirt. Too much blood, and panic clawed at her throat. She ran to the driver's side and started the engine. Behind them, the elevator dinged. Nicholas's men spilled out. Meg floored it. The SUV shot forward, tires screeching. In the rear-view mirror, she saw them scrambling for their own vehicles. But she didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. Carl's head lolled against the seat, his breathing shallow. "Stay with me," Meg said, her voice breaking. "Please, Carl. Stay with me." His hand found hers on the gear shift, squeezing weakly. Not going anywhere. But as the city lights blurred past, and the blood continued to spread, Meg wasn't sure either of them believed it. The drive back to the cabin was the longest hour of Meg's life. Carl drifted in and out of consciousness, his hand still gripping hers, his breathing labored. She talked to him the entire way, rambling about nothing, about everything, anything to keep him awake. About the books she'd read, the places she wanted to travel, the life she'd planned before all of this. She told him about her parents, how they died on a rainy night, not unlike the one when she'd gotten into Nicholas's car, how she'd been lost ever since, how he'd given her something she hadn't even known she was missing. Purpose, direction, someone to fight for. "Stay awake," she whispered over and over. "Please, Carl, stay awake." His eyes would flutter open, find hers, and she'd see him fighting to stay present, fighting to stay alive. By the time they reached the cabin, his shirt was soaked through with blood. Meg pulled up as close to the front door as she could, and ran around to his side. Carl was barely conscious, his weight heavy against her as she helped him out. They stumbled inside together, and she half carried, half dragged him to the couch. "First aid kit," Carl mumbled. "Bathroom, under the sink." Meg ran. Her hands shook as she tore through the cabinet, finding a large medical kit, the kind that looked military grade, far more extensive than anything a civilian should have. But she didn't have time to question it. She grabbed it and ran back. Carl had managed to pull his shirt off. The wound was a long slash across his ribs, deep, but, thank God, not deep enough to have hit anything vital. Blood still welled from it, steady and terrifying. "I need you to clean it," Carl said, his voice tight with pain. "Antiseptic. Then butterfly bandages. There's a suture kit if—" He broke off, grimacing. "I've never done this before." Meg's voice cracked. "You can do this." His hand found hers, squeezed. "I'll talk you through it." So she did. Her hands shook as she poured antiseptic over the wound. Carl hissed in pain, his entire body tensing, but he didn't pull away. She cleaned the blood, her stomach churning at the sight of raw, torn flesh. Then the butterfly bandages, pulling the edges together the way he instructed. The bleeding slowed. Stopped. "Good," Carl breathed. "You did good." Meg sat back on her heels, her hands covered in his blood, her whole body trembling. "You need a hospital. Real doctors." "This isn't—" "It's enough." Carl reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek, leaving a streak of red. "You saved my life tonight, Meg. In that elevator. If you hadn't grabbed him—" "Don't." She caught his hand, pressed it against her face. "Don't think about what could have happened. You're here. You're alive. That's all that matters." Carl's eyes searched hers, and something shifted in the air between them. Despite the pain, despite the blood, despite everything, there was only them. Only this moment. "Come here," he whispered. Meg leaned down, and Carl's hand slid into her hair, pulling her close. Their lips met, softer than before, deeper. It tasted like fear and relief and desperation. like a promise neither of them should make but couldn't help. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Carl rested his forehead against hers. "I should have told you to run," he murmured. "Should have sent you away the moment I pulled you from that car. I wouldn't have gone." "I know." His thumb traced her jaw. "That's what scares me." Meg pulled back just enough to look at him. "What happens now? Nicholas won't stop. Tonight proved that." Carl's expression darkened. "No, he won't. This has gone beyond business, beyond old grudges. He wants blood now. Mine, yours, both. So we run, we leave the country, disappear. He has reach everywhere, Meg. There's nowhere he won't eventually find us." "Then what?" Frustration and fear made her voice sharp. "We just wait for him to kill us?" "No." Carl sat up slowly, wincing, but determined. "We take the fight to him." "Carl, listen to me." His hands gripped her shoulders. "Nicholas has power because people fear him, because he operates in shadows. But what if we drag everything into the light? What if we expose him? His operations, his contacts, everything. He can't kill us if the whole world is watching." Meg stared at him. "You said the information you had was useless." "I lied." A ghost of a smile crossed Carl's face. "Or rather, I downplayed it. I have enough to hurt him. Not destroy him, but damage him badly. Bank accounts, shell companies, names of politicians and judges on his payroll. If that goes public, he becomes toxic. His partners abandon him. His protection disappears." "Exactly. But then he has nothing to lose. He'll come after us with everything. Maybe. Or maybe he cuts his losses and runs. Either way, we level the playing field." Carl's eyes were intense, fever bright. "It's a risk, but it's the only play we have left." Meg thought about it. About Nicholas's cold smile, his casual cruelty. About the way he'd enjoyed watching them suffer. About the fact that as long as he was free, she and Carl would never be safe. "How do we do it?" she asked. Carl smiled. Genuinely this time. "I love that you don't question whether we should. Just how. We're past should. We're in survival mode now." "Smart girl." He shifted, reaching for his phone on the coffee table. "I have contacts. Journalists who owe me favors. Prosecutors who've been trying to build a case against Nicholas for years. I give them everything, and they make it public. Simultaneously. Too big to cover up. Too widespread to stop." "When?" "Tomorrow. I need tonight to reach out, set it all up. And I need..." He grimaced, pressing a hand to his bandaged ribs. "I need to not be bleeding. You need rest." Meg stood, finding a blanket and draping it over him. "I'll keep watch. You sleep." "Meg, don't argue. You lost a lot of blood. Your body needs to recover." She sat in the chair across from him, pulling her knees up. "I'll wake you if anything happens." Carl looked like he wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at him. His eyes were already half closed. "Few hours," he mumbled. "Just a few hours." Within minutes, he was asleep. Meg watched him in the dim light. His face, usually so controlled, was softer in sleep. Younger. She could see the boy he must have been before the violence, before Nicholas, before all of it, and she felt something crack open in her chest. Something dangerous and terrifying and impossibly tender. She was falling for him. Maybe had already fallen. Somewhere between the rain and the cabin and his blood on her hands, she'd stopped being a victim in someone else's story and become a participant in her own. And Carl, broken, dangerous, noble Carl, had become the center of it. The realization should have scared her, should have sent her running, but instead, it settled into her bones like truth. She loved him. The thought was so clear, so certain, it took her breath away. Outside, the forest was silent. Inside, Carl's breathing was steady, peaceful, and Meg sat guard, her phone in her hand, watching the darkness beyond the windows for any sign of movement. Hours passed. Carl slept. And slowly, a plan began to form in Meg's mind. A way to end this that didn't involve Carl sacrificing himself. A way to give them both a chance at something beyond survival. It was risky. possibly insane. But as she watched Carl sleep, this man who'd saved her, protected her, bled for her, she knew she'd do whatever it took, even if it meant facing Nicholas one more time. Dawn broke over the forest in shades of pink and gold. Carl woke slowly, pain pulling him back to consciousness. He sat up carefully, checking his bandages, still holding. The bleeding had stopped completely. He was lucky, luckier than he'd deserved. Meg was asleep in the chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, phone still clutched in her hand. She'd stayed up all night watching over him. The thought made something warm bloom in his chest. He stood slowly, crossing to her. "Meg." She startled awake, her eyes wild for a moment before focusing on him. "Carl, you're okay. Thanks to you." He held out his hand. "Come on, real bed. You need sleep." "I'm fine. You're the one who—" "Meg." His voice was firm but gentle. "Sleep. That's an order." She was too tired to argue. She let him lead her upstairs to the bedroom, let him tuck the blanket around her. But before he could leave, her hand shot out, catching his. "Stay," she whispered. "Please." Carl hesitated. Then, carefully, he climbed into bed beside her. She immediately curled into him, her head on his chest, her arm across his waist, careful to avoid his injury. "I thought I lost you last night," she said quietly. "When I saw the knife, when I saw the blood, I'm here." His arm wrapped around her, holding her close. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me." "I promise." They lay there in the golden morning light, two people who shouldn't have found each other, who shouldn't have survived, who shouldn't have fallen in love in the middle of a war. But they had. Against all logic, against all odds. And as Carl pressed a kiss to the top of her head, as Meg's breathing evened out into sleep, he made a silent vow. He would end this. He would make Nicholas pay for every moment of fear he'd put Meg through. And when it was over, if they survived, he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never had to be afraid again. Whatever it took, whatever the cost. They spent the day preparing for war. Carl made calls from the study, his voice low and urgent, reaching out to every contact he'd cultivated over 12 years. Journalists, federal prosecutors, former associates who'd also left Nicholas's organization and wanted revenge. He was building an army of information, a weapon made of truth instead of bullets. Meg listened from the doorway, watching him work. Even injured, even exhausted, he moved with purpose. This was the man who'd climbed out of darkness and built something better. And now he was willing to burn it all down to keep her safe. She couldn't let him do it alone. Around 3 p.m, Carl emerged from the study. He looked drained, but satisfied. "It's done," he said. "Everything goes live tomorrow morning. Simultaneous drops across 6 major outlets. Financial records, witness statements, documented crimes. By noon, Nicholas won't be able to show his face without getting arrested." "Will it be enough?" Meg asked. "It'll cripple him." "Whether it's enough," Carl shrugged. "We'll find out." He crossed to where she stood by the window and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, careful of his injury, her head against his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, a rhythm she'd come to depend on. "What happens after?" she asked quietly. "After tomorrow? We disappear for a while. Let the dust settle. Then—" He pulled back to look at her. "Then we figure out what normal looks like." "Normal?" Meg laughed, but it came out shaky. "I don't even remember what that is." "Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "If you want to. If you'll have me after all this." Meg's chest tightened. "Carl—" Her phone rang. They both froze. Unknown number. Again. Carl's jaw clenched. "Don't answer it." But Meg's hand was already moving. Because if Nicholas was calling, it meant something had changed. And she needed to know what. She answered. Put it on speaker. "Hello, Meg." Nicholas's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "What do you want?" Carl demanded. "Ah, Carl. Good. You're both there. That makes this easier." Nicholas paused, and they could hear the smile in his voice. I wanted to congratulate you. Setting up this little media blitz? Clever. I almost didn't see it coming. Carl's eyes went cold. How? I have eyes everywhere, remember? Including on the journalists you've been contacting, the prosecutors, the banks. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Nicholas laughed. You've gotten soft, Carl. The man I knew would never have made such an obvious move. If you know, why call? Meg asked. Why not just stop it? Because I already have. Or rather, I've made sure that when your little exposé drops tomorrow, it'll be accompanied by something even more interesting. Evidence of Carl's past crimes, his time in my organization, murders he committed, money he laundered, all documented, all verifiable. Carl's face went white. You kept records. Insurance. I always keep insurance on people who leave. Call it a hobby. Nicholas's voice hardened. So, here's how this works. Your information goes public. Mine goes too. We both lose. Or, and this is the option I prefer, you call off your attack dogs, and I let you both live. You disappear. Change your names. Build a new life somewhere I'll never find you. And we call this even. Silence fell over the cabin. Meg looked at Carl, saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing options, measuring risks. She knew what he was thinking. If Nicholas had evidence of his past, going public would destroy him. He'd go to prison. Everything he'd built would crumble. But if they backed down, Nicholas won. And they'd spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. There's a third option, Meg said quietly. Both men went still. What option? Nicholas asked, curiosity clear in his voice. Meg met Carl's eyes, silently asking permission. He looked confused but nodded slowly. I turned myself in, Meg said. To you, willingly. You let Carl go, destroy whatever evidence you have, and I come with you. No more running, no more fighting. No. Carl's voice was sharp, immediate. Absolutely not. Meg, darling, Nicholas purred. That's very noble. But what makes you think you're valuable enough to make that trade? Because this was never about me, Meg said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It was always about Carl, about making him suffer. And what would make him suffer more than watching me choose to go with you? The silence that followed was deafening. Meg, don't do this, Carl said, his hand gripping her arm. Don't you dare. She has a point, Nicholas mused. Watching you lose someone you care about, truly care about, not just protect, that's worth more than any revenge I could take directly. I'll kill you, Carl said flatly. If you touch her, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth and I will kill you. Maybe, but you'd have to find me first. Nicholas's voice shifted, becoming businesslike. All right, Meg, you have a deal. Midnight, the warehouse on 5th and Morrison. You show up alone. I destroy the evidence on Carl. He gets to live his clean life. And you, well, we'll figure out what to do with you. Meg, no. She ended the call. Carl stared at her like she'd lost her mind. What the hell was that? A plan. That wasn't a plan. That was suicide. No. Meg turned to face him fully. That was the only way to get him in the open. To get him to let his guard down. He thinks I'm sacrificing myself, which means he'll be confident. Overconfident. Understanding slowly dawned on Carl's face. You want to trap him. I want to end this. Tonight. No more waiting for evidence to drop. No more wondering if he'll come after us. We finish it. Carl ran a hand through his hair, pacing. It's too dangerous. If something goes wrong, then we improvise. But Carl... She caught his arm, stopping him. We can't live like this. Always running, always afraid. This is our chance to take control. To choose our ending instead of letting him choose it for us. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war in his eyes. Fear, admiration, love. You're insane, he finally said. I learned from the best. Despite everything, Carl laughed. It was short, almost broken, but real. Then his expression turned serious. If we're doing this, and I can't believe I'm saying this, we do it smart. Backup plans, escape routes, and you wear a wire. Everything he says gets recorded. Deal. And Meg? He pulled her close, his forehead against hers. You stay alive. Whatever happens, whatever it takes, you stay alive. Promise me. She kissed him, soft and deep and full of everything she couldn't say. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. I promise. But you have to promise me the same thing. Deal. Midnight approached like a storm. They'd spent hours preparing. Carl had called in favors, people who owed him, who hated Nicholas, who were willing to help. The warehouse would be surrounded, but from a distance. Close enough to intervene if needed, far enough not to spook Nicholas. Meg wore a wire taped between her breasts, the microphone no bigger than a button. Carl had checked it 3 times, his hands gentle but thorough. They'd gone over the plan until she could recite it in her sleep. Now, sitting in the SUV 3 blocks from the warehouse, reality was setting in. You don't have to do this, Carl said for the 10th time. Yes, I do. Meg checked her watch. 11:50. This is the only way. Carl grabbed her hand, lacing their fingers together. I'll be listening to everything. The second something feels wrong, I'm coming in. I know. I mean it, Meg. I don't care about the plan. I don't care about evidence. You're more important. She turned to look at him. This man who'd become her entire world in a matter of days. I love you, she said simply. I should have said it earlier, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Carl. His eyes went soft, vulnerable. I love you too. Which is why I'm terrified. Good. Use that. Channel it. Because we're going to win tonight. She leaned over and kissed him one more time. See you on the other side. And then she was out of the SUV, walking toward the warehouse, her heart pounding, but her step steady. The building loomed ahead, dark and abandoned. She pushed through the side door, and it swung open with a rusty creak. Inside was cavernous. High ceilings, exposed beams, shadows that seemed to move in the dim light filtering through broken windows. Hello? Her voice echoed. Right on time. Nicholas stepped out of the shadows, impeccably dressed as always. He was alone, or appeared to be. I appreciate punctuality. I'm here. Now let Carl go. All business. No pleasantries. I like it. Nicholas circled her slowly, assessing. You really would sacrifice yourself for him, wouldn't you? How deliciously tragic. The evidence, Meg pressed. Destroy it, now. Nicholas pulled out his phone, tapped a few buttons, then turned the screen to show her. A file being deleted, then another, then a confirmation message. All copies destroyed. There, done. Carl is free. Nicholas pocketed the phone. Which means you're mine now. Meg's skin crawled, but she kept her voice steady. What happens now? Now? Nicholas smiled. Now you tell me everything Carl's been planning. Every contact, every backup plan, every little detail. And then, well, we'll see if you're more useful alive or dead. You said... I said I'd destroy the evidence on Carl. I said nothing about letting you live. Nicholas's smile turned cold. Did you really think I'd keep my word? To someone who walked into my car by mistake and ruined months of planning? Meg's heart raced. This was it. The confession. She needed him to say more. What planning? Carl was getting too comfortable. Too clean. I needed leverage to pull him back in. Make him remember what he is. What he'll always be. Nicholas stepped closer. You were supposed to be that leverage. A random girl easily controlled. But then you became something more. And that I can't allow. Why not? Because Carl doesn't get a happy ending. Nicholas's composure cracked, fury bleeding through. He doesn't get to leave, build an empire, find love, while I'm still cleaning up the mess he made. He doesn't get redemption. Not while I'm alive to stop it. So this was always about jealousy, Meg said quietly. About the fact that he got out and you didn't. Nicholas's hand shot out, gripping her throat. Not hard enough to choke, but enough to threaten. Careful, girl. And then the lights came on. Blinding, bright, flooding the warehouse. Nicholas spun, and Meg saw his face contort with rage as he realized they weren't alone. Carl stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 men in FBI jackets. More agents poured in from side entrances, and in Carl's hand, a phone, screen glowing. "Every word," Carl said quietly. "Recorded, transmitted. You just confessed to conspiracy, kidnapping, attempted murder." Nicholas's hand tightened on Meg's throat. "I'll kill her. Right now." "You know I will." "Then you die too." "Look around, Nicholas, you're surrounded. You have 1 move left. Let her go and surrender." For a long moment, nobody moved. Meg could feel Nicholas's pulse racing through his palm, could see the calculation in his eyes. Fight or flight, pride or survival. Finally, his hand dropped. Meg stumbled forward, and Carl was there, catching her, his arms steel bands around her. She buried her face in his chest, breathing him in, feeling the reality of alive, safe, together wash over her. Behind them, agents swarmed Nicholas, reading him his rights. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stared at Carl with hatred so pure it was almost tangible. "It's over," Carl whispered into Meg's hair. "It's finally over." And it was. 3 months later. The beach house was small but perfect. White walls, blue shutters, windows that opened to let in the sound of waves. Meg stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the ocean. Behind her, arms wrapped around her waist. Carl pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Morning," he murmured. "Morning." They stood like that, watching the light turn the water gold. Nicholas was in prison, awaiting trial. His organization had collapsed the moment the evidence went public. And Carl had testified, made his own deals, accepted responsibility for his past. He'd never go to prison, but he'd paid in other ways. Reputation, money, pride. But he had Meg, and she had him. "What are you thinking about?" Carl asked. "About how I got in the wrong car and ended up exactly where I needed to be." Carl turned her to face him, his eyes soft. "I love you. I love you too." He kissed her, slow and sweet, tasting like coffee and morning and forever. When they pulled apart, both smiling, Meg realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in months, maybe years, she wasn't afraid. And as they stood on that porch, the ocean stretching endlessly before them, Meg knew with absolute certainty. This was what happy endings looked like.